Nintendo Switch Sports is a fascinating game, a follow-up to a beloved series, and one that, in concept alone, begs a lot of questions. How do you revive a dormant series, one designed around a console nearly 2 decades old? How do you improve upon and modernize a minimalist classic? And importantly, how does an offline-focused party game translate to the age of online gaming? These are a few of the questions developers at Nintendo were likely asking themselves leading up to the release of Nintendo Switch Sports in 2022. Wii Sports and Wii Sports Resort mean so many things to so many people, holding over a decade of nostalgia, childhood memories, and the longing for simpler days. And that's ignoring the fact that they're damn good games as well. I have a whole video on the original Wii Sports that you can watch if you want to hear my full thoughts. This video is sort of a part 2 to that. With so many emotions tied up in the series' legacy and identity, it's no surprise that following the game's reveal during Nintendo's February Direct last year, longtime fans came away with very mixed feelings. Switch Sports looked to be taking things in a bold new direction, most obvious in its completely refreshed art style and conspicuous lack of Miis, Nintendo's go-to player avatars for over 15 years. A quick peek at the YouTube comments section for the announcement trailer points to a rather mixed reception, and for understandable reasons. But the aesthetics weren't the only concern. The game's announcement came with a couple twists. Firstly, there would be a special mode in the game that required the use of the Joy-Con leg strap accessory. Secondly, golf was planned as a playable sport but wouldn't arrive until a future update. The promise of continued support is still relatively new territory for Nintendo, and so far they don't exactly have a great track record. Lastly, there's the game's focus on online play, which is yet another major area of concern for Nintendo fans. Taking all this into account, I was cautiously optimistic as I awaited the game's release in April of last year. When the game finally did release, however, the mixed feelings continued. See, Nintendo Switch Sports is really 2 different games in one. Switch Sports, the offline party game, a follow-up to Wii Sports, and Switch Sports, the online multiplayer party game, more in line with something like Fall Guys. These 2 sides of Switch Sports reveal a lot about the game, both its biggest strengths and weaknesses. Focusing mainly on local play when the game first came out, I fell off pretty quick, ready to write the game off as a neat, slightly overpriced little sports game, but more of a failure and missed opportunity as a Wii Sports sequel. Before diving back in, I was planning to title this video something along the lines of what went wrong with Nintendo Switch Sports, and it's safe to say my opinion was fairly negative. Even as I was editing my Wii Sports video, however, and needed to record some footage of the game, that negative view began to shift. The more I played and bopped my head to the music and reviewed my footage, I began to think, hold on, is this game actually good? Do I like this game? Well, I've played a lot more Switch Sports since then, and I have a lot of thoughts, as you might be able to tell from the length of this video. I won't spoil too much, but I will just say, I love this game. I think it's really good. It has some major problems that I hope to cover, ones that mark an increasingly worrying future for Nintendo, but I hope to also convince you of its quality, its beautiful presentation, and its fun as hell games. So, I hope you'll join me in exploring the conundrum of Nintendo Switch Sports. One of Nintendo Switch Sports' biggest departures from its predecessors is its overall aesthetic, opting for a style consisting of flat colors, soft gradients, sharp edges, and sleek, stylish animations. Right off the bat, I have to say, I love this game's style. I think it does an outstanding job at modernizing the minimalism of Wii Sports, but adding an extra flair of playfulness that wasn't present in the series before. The Wii Sports series was really shaped by limitations, and I get the sense that despite the enormous success of its art style, it wasn't exactly a priority in development. Switch Sports, on the other hand, is all about style. This new direction necessitated a couple things, the primary of which was a huge step in moving away from the Mii. This was a massive sticking point for a lot of fans, with many people commenting that this change alone killed their hype or ruined the game. It's a position I even agreed with at first. It was a real shock when the game was first revealed. The Mii has been part of Nintendo's brand since the Wii released in 2006. That's a long time for people to have grown accustomed to these goofy little guys, and it's understandable why many would be apprehensive. Don't fix what isn't broken, etc. In place of the Miis, Switch Sports instead features, wait, hold on. Sports Mates. Huh. Switch Sports features Sports Mates as the playable characters, and this is probably the boldest single decision the game makes. While I love the Sports Mates now, and I'll discuss them more throughout this video, they did take some getting used to. The Miis have this immediate charm to them. They look extremely unique, timeless, and instantly recognizable. The Sports Mates, on the other hand, look very 2020s. Especially the ones featured in the box art and promotional material have a very safe, corporate look to them. It's easy to imagine similar looking characters appearing alongside Mark Zuckerberg in an ad for the metaverse or in some fast food commercial. If you told me in 2022 that these were Fortnite characters, I'd probably have believed you. While I love Miis, however, they've clearly had their time in the sun. For this game in particular, Nintendo clearly wanted new avatars able to match this stylish new aesthetic, and the 2006 derpiness of the Miis simply wasn't gonna cut it. From a nostalgic perspective, it's a sad change, marking the beginning of the end for Miis and ushering in a new era of change and uncertainty. It's a change though that I think was for the best, and now that I've played a lot more of the game, I've really warmed up to this new look. The Sports Mates are just so goddamn cute, brought to life primarily by Nintendo's incredible animators. I love the expressions they make when focusing during the sports, when celebrating wins or languishing losses, and there are tons of little touches that add so much life to the game, like how one character will turn to another with an annoyed expression if that character's interaction cost them a point. Sometimes I'll just sit and watch the replays to catch all the little details. Then of course, there's the customization options. It's something I think the marketing for this game really missed, and might be part of why people were so put off at first. In reality, it's great, and goes far beyond anything available in prior games. What's better than a cute little guy? A cute little guy with a hat, that's what. The ability to add your own personal flair on top of these already stylish characters really just completes their appeal, and I'm really happy with how things turned out in the end. Of course, the customization system has a lot of problems, which I'll come back to later, most notably the severely lacking default options. Even so, the default Sports Mates remain full of life, even if their hairstyles look a little goofy. That term in general, full of life, sums up how I feel about the presentation of Nintendo Switch Sports. When the game was first revealed, people were clamoring to be able to walk around and explore Spacco Square, the large plaza and set of facilities the games take place in. And I must admit, they had good reason. The background environments in this game are intricately detailed, depicting a clean, utopic haven where athletes and fans from around the world come to compete in and watch their favorite sports. It's like the Olympics, but without all the corruption. The buildings are constructed of industrial materials like wood, bricks, steel, and glass, yet feature brightly colored panels, lush greenery, and are lit by natural sunlight. So much is going on in every corner, from the cute little cafe next to the badminton court, to the lifted walkways of the bowling alley, the restored brick library of the Chambara arena, and the aquatic periphery of the tennis courts. I desperately want to live, even just exist in these spaces. They're so beautiful and I could stare at them endlessly. Shockingly, part of this extends to the exteriors as well, with Spocko's full layout depicted in the background of the Choose a Sport page. This could easily have just been a menu like it was in Wii Sports, but I'm so glad they went the extra mile. The buildings are genuinely beautiful works of utopian architecture with large sweeping curves, geometric shapes, and interesting use of asymmetry. And there's tons of little details like the pedestrian walkway between the badminton and bowling buildings, or the monorail track surrounding the square. The plaza does look a little lifeless from afar, and I wish you could see little people walking around, but the menu is already fairly laggy as it is, so I suppose they had to draw the line somewhere. All of this adds to an immense sense of congruity, of a believable, continuous space. This same idea was part of the reason people loved the legendary Woohoo Island from Wii Sports Resort, but here it's taken to a whole new level. Like, you can see each stadium from inside the others, in exactly the same spot you see them on the map. Not only do you see them, they loom over you. The sense of scale is incredible. The background music is even processed to enhance the believability, echoing off the surrounding walls and towering ceilings. The game's audio as a whole really just further adds to the immersion. Not only can you see all the stuff happening in the background, but you can hear it as well. Every time something happens, you hear noises from the crowd, and it always sounds a little different. Even in the bowling alley, which I'd consider this game's low point audio-wise, you can hear the sounds from other lanes and little claps and woots from the crowd as you knock down each set of pins.
Great double.
I love how the rackets connecting with the ball in tennis are a slightly different pitch and timbre depending on the speed and angle. And the same goes for the little squeaks of the characters' shoes in volleyball. And similar elements in other sports. In my video on Wii Sports, I talked about how much I love its iconic music, and how it's grown, in some cases, beyond even the legacy of the game itself. And while I don't think Switch Sports will overtake it anytime soon, I think it can definitely compete. The music in Switch Sports is a little understated, designed with intention to blend into the background soundscape as you're playing. However, it's deceptively catchy. Within just a few minutes of playing, I find myself constantly humming the main menu theme, and when I recorded a short clip of bowling for the Wii Sports video, I had the background music playing in my head on repeat. The main menu music almost sounds like a remix of the original Wii Sports theme, and it goes a long way in making it feel like part of the same series. The background music, however, diverges a little more. Each song has two different versions, a more acoustic, processed one that plays during the game, and a more upbeat, synth-heavy version that plays during replays. The transition between the two is seamless, and it's incredibly satisfying every time.
0-1.
It's a really cool effect that brings the game closer to modern, stem-based game audio, where different tracks can fade in and out depending on context. The final area of presentation I want to talk about is, I guess, what you'd call visual effects. Almost every action in the game has a little accompanying visual element, whether it be swinging a racket, connecting with a ball, or blocking a strike in Chambara. These effects are what I'd consider the core of Switch Sports' visual aesthetic, bringing the flat colors, subtle gradients, and simple shapes of the UI to life within the actual game world. Even more so than the audio, the visual effects add up to make every frame feel complete, the devs leaving no corner untouched or rock unturned when it comes to adding aesthetic flair to the game. Looking at freeze frames sort of demonstrates what I'm talking about, but the true beauty of the effect can really only be seen and felt in motion. Nintendo Switch Sports is an absolute treat visually, and I'd even go so far as to say it's one of the most cohesive visual experiences we've ever seen in video games. The game knows exactly what it wants to be and never falters in that pursuit. But of course, it's still a game, and visuals can only get you so far, especially when some of its other aspects can be hit or miss. Before I dive into the actual sports, I want to talk about the experience of playing the game in general. Most sports are played using a single Joy-Con, in line with the Wiimote experience of the original two games. For the most part, the Joy-Cons are a massive improvement, with much more precise tracking of position, rotation, and acceleration, and this allowed the developers to add a ton of depth to many of the sports. However, the Joy-Cons do suffer from gyro drift, and many sports require you to recenter with the press of a button before each round. It's a small thing, but it does detract somewhat from the otherwise excellent immersion. I'm not really sure why the Wiimote never suffered this same problem. Maybe it had something to do with the sensor bar? I don't know. If you have any insight, I'd love to hear it in the comments. There's also the issue of the left-hand Joy-Con. If you have a bunch of right-handed people playing, which is, statistically very likely, some of them are gonna have to use a left Joy-Con. The Joy-Cons in general don't have amazing ergonomics, but they do at least fit well into their respective hands, so having to play with the wrong-handed controller is a pretty subpar experience. Unfortunately, there's not really much that can be done about this. Joy-Cons are sold in pairs, and no one wants to pay hundreds of dollars to get 4 or more right-hand Joy-Cons. I'd honestly consider this one of the game's biggest turnoffs, and it's definitely part of why I think it struggles as an offline party game, but that's something I'll come back to later in this video. Finally, I just have to mention the HD rumble. Being able to feel the actions that are happening on screen is really nice, and it feels so natural that you don't even think about it while you're playing. I even had to go back and check that they were in fact using rumble before writing this. Anyway, that's all about the Joy-Cons. Let's move on. Nintendo Switch Sports features 7 sports: volleyball, badminton, bowling, soccer, chambara, tennis, and golf. This is up from the 5 featured in the original Wii Sports, but down from the 12 in Wii Sports Resort. That number also carries a slight asterisk, as golf was not present in the game for quite some time after launch, but I'll come back to that soon. Of those 7, 3, or arguably 4 if you count Chambara, are returning from previous games. I do think the selection itself is a little bit odd, even just at face value, like with badminton and tennis being very similar. I'll expand on this more as I discuss the sports in detail, and I guess I'll just go in order, starting with volleyball. When I first played the game last year, I came away thinking that volleyball was easily the best sport in the game. It's simple, self-explanatory, easy to play yet hard to master. It feels like a proper entry into the Wii Sports library, yet brings along a key update by letting you position your character manually. It's a change that, in hindsight, makes so much sense. The characters will still move automatically given no input. You aren't forced to use this new mechanic, but it's there for those who want it, and I think it adds a ton of depth. I wish the option were available in other sports as well. Volleyball does have a bit of motion control jank, or at least it can feel like it. Timing your hits properly, are they called hits in volleyball? is actually quite challenging to the point where it can sometimes feel like the Joy-Con sensors are failing you. That feeling of, I did everything right, but it just didn't work, is unfortunately still kind of unavoidable when using motion-controlled input, so I don't hold this against Switch Sports or volleyball in particular. It just happens to be more impactful in volleyball since the consequences can greatly change the outcome of a round. However, it's a relatively minor issue in the grand scheme of things. Volleyball has some of the best vibes out of any sport, with top-notch background music, background environment, and character animations. It's times like these I wish I could say more about the music. My music theory knowledge is unfortunately pretty lacking. It's nearly impossible for me to describe exactly what I like about it. I just know I really enjoy the volleyball track. Its fast-paced drum and bass sound adds so much energy to the game, one that honestly would feel otherwise fairly slow. I still think volleyball is one of the best sports in the game, even if it's no longer my favorite. To find out which sport is my favorite, you'll just have to keep watching. For now, let's move on to badminton. Badminton in Switch Sports is not great. A fairly mindless and fast-paced back and forth is interrupted only by the inclusion of the drop shot, which allows you to lightly return the birdie, or shuttlecock for those of you badminton fans out there, so that it lands just over the net. While this seems like it would add some much-needed depth, it ends up being more of a gimmick. Outside of one player completely missing their swing, there's really only one series of events that ever leads to a point being scored. If you perform a drop shot while the other player is too far away, their character will dive forward in an attempt to make the return. This creates a weak hit, a mechanic shared between badminton, tennis, and volleyball. Here, as well as in tennis, returning a weak hit will always be a spike. Spikes are very hard to return to begin with, but basically impossible in badminton since your character is likely still recovering from diving forward. And this is pretty much exactly how it plays out, point after point, each player just waiting to get a lucky opening where they think a drop shot will seal the deal. It's extremely repetitive, and the game gives you no extra options to shake things up. In being so similar to tennis, I can't help but draw comparisons. Unlike even Wii Sports tennis, aiming in badminton is basically non-existent. Unlike the predictable yet engaging physics of a bouncing tennis ball, the flight path of the birdie almost never changes. This is the main reason I think that badminton is such a poor fit for Switch Sports. It's basically just tennis but worse. It's much less fun, has less depth, has a very similar setup, and can be played by fewer people. Additionally, as much as I love the theming of the full badminton stadium, the court itself is fairly small and uninteresting, and its immediate vicinity is completely flat and empty. Even the music I'd consider probably the worst in the game. Overall, it's a pretty dull experience and a real wasted opportunity. Thankfully, there's a lot of other sports to play. Perhaps the most anticipated sport of them all, bowling makes a long-awaited return from both Wii Sports and Sports Resort. And I have to say, while it's not bad by any means, something is definitely off. First, let's talk about the good. The Joy-Cons are a huge improvement over the Wiimote, making it much more straightforward to control where you want the ball to go. I actually learned something new about Wii Sports bowling since making my video. Turns out when I said, the rotation of the ball, while still predictable, seems to have no actual relation to the direction you twist the controller. I was completely correct. In Wii Sports Bowling, the amount of spin applied to the ball is determined by when you release your throw, and has absolutely nothing to do with the rotation of the Wiimote. With the extremely precise gyroscope of the Joy-Cons, this is no longer the case. You can actually control the spin of the ball by spinning the controller, and it really removes a lot of the frustration from the experience. It's so much better, in fact, that it has the unintended side effect of making the game way easier. If you're at all paying attention, it's pretty hard to not at least get a spare in each round. This is where a bit of the weirdness begins. I almost feel like the game is too easy now. You'd think that dramatically improving the controls would add depth to the game, but I almost feel like the opposite has happened. Again, it's not a dramatic step back, but it does feel a little more boring. It seems like Nintendo even realized this because bowling actually offers a second game mode. Picking bowling from the menu prompts you to choose between normal bowling and a special mode, which transforms the bowling alley into a set of obstacle courses, increasing in difficulty as you go, of course. It's a pretty fun minigame, although it does feel a little half-baked. The last 3 frames of special bowling suddenly just turn back into normal bowling, which is a super bizarre choice. Shouldn't those be the hardest levels? What really makes bowling feel kind of off-putting, however, has gotta be the sound design and camera work. I mentioned earlier that you can hear sounds from other lanes and noises from the crowd during the game, and I do think those things are great. However, I think it's too little. Maybe it's just me, but I also think the audio has too much reverb, making it feel like the bowling alley is massive and empty, despite the sounds you can hear. The music sounds miles away, and during replays, the sound of the pins echoes with very little impact. The replays are the biggest weakness for sure. Getting a strike in Wii Bowling was exciting, and the audio and camera work really sold the impact during replays.
Nice throw!
In Switch Sports, the replays feel weak and uninspired. The pins feel weightless as they're sent flying after impact. I really do think this could all be fixed with just a couple minor tweaks, especially to the audio, and bowling here would be just as fun as it's been in the past, if a little on the easy side. While I'm mixed on bowling overall, I don't think it's a bad addition to the game by any means, and it's definitely one I could see myself coming back to in the future despite its flaws. Unfortunately, the same can't really be said about soccer. Soccer, or football for those of you outside America, is by far the most puzzling inclusion in Nintendo Switch Sports, and for a lot of different reasons. Let's start from the top. Soccer offers 4 different game modes, the most of any sport. First, there's 1v1 and 4v4, which are fairly self-explanatory. 1v1 uses a smaller field and has a shorter time limit. Since there's fewer players, goals tend to happen much more frequently. 4v4 is essentially the exact same game, except the field is bigger and the time limit is longer, and goals happen less often. So, what's weird about soccer, you might ask? Well, basically everything. Firstly, it's the only sport to require 2 Joy-Cons, and this is because soccer is barely a motion control game. You move with the left stick, adjust the camera with the right stick, and hold down left trigger to run. Fairly bog-standard third-person controls. In fact, the only thing you use motion controls for is actually kicking the ball, and even that has its own quirks. The direction you kick is always relative to the camera and not your character, which leads to a lot of situations where you think you have a shot lined up, only for the ball to go in completely the wrong direction. This would be a fine choice if the automated camera system were more aggressive, but as it stands, you have to be managing your camera constantly if you want any chance of controlling where the ball actually goes. These controls dramatically reduce the accessibility, making soccer by far the least accessible game in Switch Sports. I can't imagine trying to get my parents or grandparents to understand running and controlling the camera at the same time. It also just goes against the spirit of Wii Sports. Nothing about this experience feels like it was made with casual players in mind, but it's far too dumbed down to be fun for more experienced players either. It's genuinely really confusing. It's not terrible, and I think I would rather play it than badminton, but that's not really saying much. The vast majority of the game is spent just chasing after the ball, and the outcomes feel incredibly random. It has zero depth, and as a result, is very boring. The third mode to choose from is free practice, which has you running around an empty field by yourself with the ball. I don't really understand who this is for or why anyone would pick this over just playing against bots, but I guess it's nice that the option was included. Finally, there's Shootout, which actually sounds like it might be kind of fun. Unfortunately, I can't play it, and neither can anyone who bought a digital copy of Nintendo Switch Sports. And that's because it requires the leg strap accessory, carried over from Ring Fit Adventure. Of course, I could just tape a Joy-Con to my leg, but I don't really feel like that would be in the spirit of things. Plus, it's not like you're gonna whip out the gaffer tape with a group of friends over. You're just not gonna play this mode. Additionally, as far as I can tell, soccer is the only sport where you can even use the leg strap to begin with. It's so very odd. I guess the one thing soccer does have going for it is some decent background music. Next up is Chambara, which is extremely similar to Swordplay from Wii Sports Resort. I know that was likely the most beloved sport from that game, so it's nice to see it return in some form here. The extra modes from Swordplay are unfortunately nowhere to be found, but Chambara does at least offer some variety in the form of different swords. First is the default sword. All you can do is block and strike, making sure to line up your hits in order to avoid being knocked back by your opponent's block. It's fairly entertaining, offering a little bit of the mind games you'd want in a 1v1 game like this, but it would get old fairly quick were it not for the charge sword. The charge sword works similarly to the default one, but with one important difference. Blocking a strike charges up your sword, allowing you to do a charge attack once you've built up enough energy. In my opinion, this small change really deepens the game, offering a much more engaging risk-reward proposition when trying to time your attacks. It also greatly speeds up matches and leads to fewer draws, which is nice. Finally, there's the twin swords, which sound cool, but really offer essentially identical gameplay to the charge sword. The one key difference is that your meter charges automatically over time rather than from blocking hits, and this removes that risk-reward I was just talking about, so it's basically just the charge sword but worse. You can't even really swing both swords at once, and having to use two Joy-Cons is just a little bit more cumbersome, so I'm not sure why I'd ever pick this over the charge sword. Having said that, like with everything else, I'm glad they included the option in case someone out there really likes it. I definitely get the appeal of dual-wielding swords. Overall, Chambara is decent fun. Definitely not my least favorite, but not quite my favorite either. That would be tennis. Holy shit! After spending time complaining about the tedium and lack of depth of tennis in my Wii Sports video, desperately looking for something to latch onto but being unable to find it, I cannot tell you how good it feels to play a fully realized version of tennis in Nintendo Switch Sports. For some reason, I never even played tennis when this game first came out, and boy was that a huge mistake. Like I've said many times now, it's impossible to overstate how much better the Joy-Con gyro is than the Wiimote, and it enables some incredible things. Not only do the much more precise controls make the base mechanics of swinging and hitting the ball feel much better, but you can also now add backspin and topspin depending on how you twist the controller. That's crazy! It's an extremely subtle change, but it adds so much depth. Sometimes it even happens without you really thinking. It's so cool. On top of that, as far as I can tell, the speed you swing your controller now actually contributes to how hard you hit the ball, which feels incredible. You're offered so much control over how you want to play, making tennis by far the deepest game in Switch sports. A cool addition in this regard is the ability to dive in order to keep the ball in play. I'm fairly certain this was a thing in Wii Sports, but it was impossible to do consistently. On top of that, most of the time the swing would still miss anyway. In Switch Sports, diving is not only much more consistent, but also carries a greater risk in the form of the weak hit, something I mentioned in badminton and volleyball. There's so many little variables like this that make tennis an absolute joy to play. There's also some major quality of life improvements. If your character is facing the wrong direction for the type of swing you're trying to do, they'll try to kind of slide into place to hit the ball instead of just standing there and awkwardly missing. It doesn't always work, but I think that's for the best. It would be kind of weird if you could do any hit from anywhere. Additionally, the amount of unintended or dropped inputs is greatly reduced. This was one of the biggest problems in Wii Sports tennis, and it's basically not an issue anymore, which is really great. Tennis has excellent aesthetics, which is really to be expected at this point, but it's yet another area where the game is improved over its Wii Sports counterpart. I already mentioned the super unique ring of water that surrounds the courts, and that's courts, plural. There are multiple different courts, each featuring slightly different color schemes. Like the other sports, tennis has great background music, which honestly might be the single biggest uplift in quality over the original, which had no music at all. Tennis is easily my favorite sport in the game, and I honestly don't think it's even close. Golf is the last sport on the list, and wasn't even present when the game first launched. I find it intriguing why they chose golf as the sport to leave out, but I guess it kind of makes sense given the position it holds in the series' legacy, wanting something to dangle in front of longtime fans to draw them back in. I suppose I'm more surprised that they chose to leave anything out at all. I'll admit, I'm not even a huge fan of golf, but something about it just being there really brings the whole package together, making the experience feel more complete. I don't know, maybe it's just because of how the menu is laid out. Anyway, golf in Switch Sports is really good. From the improved input alone, Joy-Con good yada yada, you get the point. Golf here is already the best in the series, but it goes beyond just that. All 18 courses from both Wii Sports and Sports Resort are back, complete with massive visual overhauls to fit the stylized aesthetics of Switch Sports. It looks really good in my opinion, though I do wish there were a tiny bit more variety. I especially like how they've livened up the environments with the trees swaying in the wind, leaves blowing, water rippling, and even little people chilling on the beach and in the added stands. Even in the more empty courses, they've added small touches like a couple golf carts in the background, and they really go a long way. There's tons of little quality of life improvements, like a cleaner minimap that shows you the wind direction in 2D in addition to the 3D arrow up top, or telling you which hole you're on, what par, and how many strokes you're at while actually shooting. I don't even really know what else I could say. It's basically everything you could want from an updated Wii Sports Golf. There's even a whole new set of challenge stages, and their environments are super creative. I love the tall cliffs and retro-futuristic observing booths jutting out of them. It looks like something you'd see in a 1940s pamphlet about the future of sports technology. On the whole, I think golf is really great, and I mostly understand why it took so long to arrive. It looks like a ton of work has gone into it. I wish it could have been there at launch, but I'm glad it's here now. Like I said, it really rounds out the package, making the game feel complete in a way it just didn't before. As great as many of the sports are, longtime fans of the series will notice immediately that there's a noticeable lack of any real side content or minigames. Something like training in the original Wii Sports that would keep you playing by putting clever spins on top of the existing sports modes. Outside of soccer, none of the sports even have a way to practice outside of just playing versus bots. Likewise, entering into the customization menu reveals a conspicuous lack of items available for your character, but the menu is clearly designed for you to unlock entire pages worth. So what's going on here? Well, this brings us to the primary flaw of Nintendo Switch Sports. See, there are actually some extra game modes in the game, and you can, of course, unlock tons of items and cosmetics for your characters. The thing is, though, the only way to access any of this content is by playing online. Oh. Oh no. Switch Sports is clearly an online-first game. I mean, the global option is literally above local on the main menu. In a lot of ways, this leaves the offline play feeling like an afterthought, but I'll touch on that again in a bit. Luckily, Switch Sports is not really a live service game, at least not in the traditional sense, though you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise at first glance. While there are unlockable cosmetics and even competitive matchmaking available for each sport, there's no battle pass, no cash shop, no in-game currency, and no way to outright buy items. In fact, there's no possible way to spend extra money on this game whatsoever, and hey, credit where credit is due, I can appreciate that at the very least. There are of course still some major issues that I have, but we'll get to those soon. First, let's come back to the sports. Badminton, volleyball, and soccer remain unchanged, while the rest of the sports have something unique about them when playing online, from simple changes in scoring to different game modes altogether. Starting with the basics, the scoring in tennis is changed from the usual sets of 1, 3, or 5, along with the bizarre scoring system used in real tennis, to instead be a simple first to 7, where 1 point is, well, 1 point. Not really sure why they did this, but hey, it doesn't affect the game whatsoever, and just proves how weird normal tennis scoring is for no reason. One interesting quirk of online tennis is that because the game is always 2v2 on the court, you can actually get matched 2v1, where you control both of your characters at once, while your two opponents each control one. This was the case in at least 50% of my matches, and I have to say, it did feel kind of unfair. My closest matches were all in games that were 1v1. I suppose that it makes sense from a matchmaking population perspective, but I wish there were at least an option to queue 1v1 or 2v2 only. Chambara is fairly similar to offline, except that you have no control over which sword your opponent will be using. This one is just kind of puzzling to me because, like, why would anyone not just pick the charge sword in that case? I always picked the charge sword and I won all my matches against people who didn't, so I don't know. That brings me to bowling and golf, both of which have their normal game modes entirely replaced by survival, which is basically this game's version of Battle Royale. Both games are actually a lot of fun, playing mostly like normal except that someone gets eliminated at the end of each round. It's a nice way to heighten the stakes, and I get why Nintendo didn't want people playing potentially hour-long games of 18-hole golf on their servers. Would it have been nice to have the option to play normal bowling at least? Yeah, but I gotta admit, the alternative could be a lot worse. One thing I have to touch on regarding online play in Switch Sports is that a lot of the matchups seem fairly easy. I wasn't measuring, but my win rate when recording for this video must have been in the 80 to 90% range. It's likely that a lot of this has to do with the primary demographic of Switch owners being mostly young kids. It makes it a little hard to feel good about winning when you realize your opponent is probably hyped up on TikTok and chocolate milk, busy worrying about the sudden reappearance of dinosaurs. Playing soccer online makes this really apparent. For the most part, my teammates have been absolutely clueless. It's also unclear what percentage of games have bots in them. I'm fairly certain there are some, since there will sometimes be players with identical names and appearances to the ones you play against in offline games. It seems to not be too common, which is nice, though it's definitely a little difficult to tell. Perhaps the most shocking addition to the game in the online mode is Pro League, a fully fledged ranked matchmaking system for each sport. I'm not sure why I'm so surprised, but I really didn't think I'd ever see this in a Nintendo game. Needless to say, I think it's a great addition, giving skilled players something to actually work toward beyond just stomping 6-year-olds all day. To unlock Pro League for a given sport, you have to play 10 online matches, which the game really doesn't do a good job of explaining. For that matter, the game barely mentions Pro League to begin with. I only even knew it existed because I had accidentally stumbled upon it in the menus. Additionally, there's no way to see how many matches you've played of each sport, so you kind of just have to keep playing until it unlocks. Matches played in online co-op don't count toward this unlock either, which is yet another thing the game doesn't tell you. On the whole, it feels a little like Pro League was hidden on purpose, and I'm not really sure why. There's no way to opt out of it. If you play 10 matches of a sport, you will enter that sport's Pro League whether you want to or not, so it's not like they're trying to stop people from entering accidentally. It's a really bizarre way of handling the whole system, but hey, I'm glad it's here at least. Entering into the online mode for the first time will likely set off some major alarm bells for anyone who's well versed in modern gaming. Switch Sports really does have the veneer of a classic live service game, with the first thing it shows you upon clicking that Play Globally button being the current set of cosmetic rewards. In my eyes, this is maybe the most controversial thing present in the game, pivoting hard away from its offline party game roots, and toward the absolute cesspool that is online multiplayer in the 2020s. Playing online is the only way to earn cosmetics. You can't earn them offline, and you can't earn them online with friends. Each time you play a match, you earn a base level of 30 points toward a reward. This is then added to and multiplied by various bonuses like winning the game, accomplishing various random tasks like long volley in tennis, and most notably, the event bonus. Events give you extra points for playing certain sports, and the list of active sports seems to rotate at random every 15 minutes or so. Finally, when you reach 100 points, you unlock a reward. You pick the collection you want, and then you receive an item selected at random out of that group. Which collections are available to choose from rotates every week. So, there's a couple issues I have here. Firstly, the event bonuses. I don't even think they're a terrible idea, I just wish there were other ways of consistently earning extra points. They do get you out of your comfort zone and incentivize playing all the different sports. However, they also kind of incentivize grinding sports that you might not be super interested in. Like, let's say I really want to play bowling, but there's currently no event on it. I could just play anyway and earn fewer points, or I could play soccer instead. Of course, I don't really like soccer, but hey, more points. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a little, but I hope you see what I mean. Next, there's the collections. This mechanic is ripped straight from loot boxes, where your reward for completing challenges and accumulating enough points isn't getting to unlock the item you want, but rather the opportunity to unlock an item which may or may not be the one you want. The collections in Switch Sports are at least fairly small and appear to have flat odds, and you can choose which collection you want to redeem your points with, but my point still stands. All this system does is ensure people keep playing for longer by preventing them from unlocking the items they want right away. Additionally, much like the cash shops in games like Valorant and Fortnite, these collections stick around for a limited time with no indication as to if or when the items within will ever return. If the events were quietly whispering in your ear that, hey, maybe you could grind a little, these collections are shouting it right in your face. See an item you want? better get to work before it's too late. Of course, given that there's no monetization in this game whatsoever, I'm being a little overly serious. I have to admit, it does give you something to work toward, and I suppose it's better than not having cosmetics in the game at all, I think? There's also one more thing to mention about this, and that's the impact it has on the offline game. The cosmetic rewards definitely create a sneaking sensation that you're wasting your time by not playing online, and the severe lack of default cosmetics only reinforces this feeling. Like, why is basic facial hair locked behind online rewards? Why are these the only default hairstyles? I mean, hey, at least they let you pick your fucking skin tone, right? The default options are so lacking that it literally feels like something is broken. Surely this can't be it, you might think to yourself opening the game for the first time, and that's before you even take into account the endless customization offered by the Mii creator that the original Wii Sports games piggybacked off of. I do worry what this means for Nintendo's future, that perhaps this is them priming fans into being more accepting of gacha systems being included in their games. Switch Sports operates so much like a gacha game, but without actually being one, and that's what scares me the most. All they'd need to do is turn on the monetization. The systems are already in place. Of course, only time will tell, but it's a very concerning development to say the least. The last thing I'll mention about online is that, all things considered, this has gotta be one of Nintendo's most successful online services in terms of quality. The stability is very good, with minimal slowdown compared to the absolute dumpster fire that is something like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. The game also does a good job of canceling the match and booting you back to the menu if it detects someone's connection is too unstable. It makes for a much more seamless experience. Only volleyball really seems to suffer from issues like desync and rubber banding, though I have experienced it a little bit in tennis as well. Overall, I'm extremely impressed, even if I suppose I really shouldn't be since it's 2023 and many other companies have had this on lock for over 20 years. Regardless, I'm at least glad it's not something to worry about. I have to admit, I was hesitant coming back to Nintendo Switch Sports. When I briefly returned for my Wii Sports video, I was hit with an ounce of suspicion, a tiny inkling that perhaps this game was far more than I'd chalked it up to be. This game got its hooks in me, and for that I'm incredibly grateful. A game I once considered a write-off, an absolute failure of a sequel, has quickly skyrocketed to become one of my favorite games on the Switch. It's a flashy, stylish experience with some of the best motion controls I've used outside of literal VR, and a game that received completely unnecessary flack from fans on release. I hope I've made it clear by now that while my feelings may still be somewhat mixed, I've come away with a massively, unexpectedly positive opinion of this game. Switch Sports has Nintendo's artists firing on all cylinders, packing sheer amounts of aesthetic flair and polish that seem near impossible. To tie it back to my Wii Sports video, can you imagine if this were a pack-in game for the Switch, or even a launch title? God damn, that would have been incredible. Comparing this to something like 1-2 Switch is simply comedic, an absolutely embarrassing proposition. Nintendo Switch Sports has a lot of problems, but luckily none of them directly impact the actual gameplay. In that sense, outside of core series like Mario and Zelda, this is Nintendo operating at their absolute peak, and it's truly a sight to behold. You simply don't get this level of polish anywhere else. I love this game's aesthetic, I love the music, I've even really grown to appreciate the immense appeal of the controversial Sportsmates. While it's not saying much, for $40 this is likely Nintendo's highest value offering on the Switch, outside of the recently released Metroid Prime Remastered. If nothing else, I hope what you take away from this video is that Switch Sports wasn't a failure. Not only is it a genuinely incredible game, but it successfully carries on, in my opinion, the iconic legacy of the Wii Sports series. A work of visual perfection, an awesome marrying of style and substance, a love letter to the series past while modernizing it for a new generation of players. I know it's unlikely, but 17 years from now, I hope people look back on Nintendo Switch Sports with the same respect and admiration they do Wii Sports now. It's what the game deserves. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and sharing with anyone you think would also enjoy. If you haven't already, check out my video on the original Wii Sports. I have it linked in the top right corner and in the description below. Again, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.